Hi, I'm Ikea, and for today's video, I want to have an in-depth look into the hard-core global modifier. And this is, of course, not the hardcore game mode, but the modifier of this season, just to add to some confusion, is also called hardcore. And yeah, in this video, we'll go over how much it can add to a build, also how it works actually. Of course, we'll start with that, go over some of the actives and the passives, explain how they will work out. And also we'll go into some of the numbers, because on the damage end of things, on the weapon damage end of things, we can gain a lot of damage. And we'll also even look at, on the skill end, we can also gain a ton of damage with the Seasons modifier. And as always, everything will be timestamped down below, so you can jump around as you wish. Let's go get started. And we'll start by looking at the main modifier, of course. As always, to go to there, it's in our inventory. It's just this, little slot over here next to our specialization weapon. If we go into there, we go to the modifier that is currently available. So with this season, it is this, but also actually, if you go into the legacy missions, you can do the previous season's modifiers in the master missions, or well, the climax missions of previous seasons. So you can actually have a taste of some of the previous seasons, but let's discuss this season. And yeah, it is the hard-core global modifier, not to be confused with hardcore, the game mode. And yeah, it's kind of annoying actually that they've picked the same name, but for a season it's fine. We'll just have to just call this the global modifier and for most of this video I'll just call it the global modifier. And in here we receive 3 new attributes. This is firearms, stamina, and electronics. And for those that have played Division 1, they'll recognize these as the main stats from Division 1. And then also, yeah, each one provides a bonus that scales based on its current tier. So there's tiering to these, and at different thresholds, you reach a new tier up to tier 5. So there's tier 1 all the way up to tier 5, which is, this doesn't explain that well. The scores baseline are affected by the cores on your gear, and it can be raised by eliminating enemies marked with a hostile countermeasures. So any build that you have, once you equip it, you will be able to see how many tiers you have with that build. And then as you kill enemies that have the hostile modifiers on them, they basically have the icons of a red, a blue, and a yellow icon above their head when they do. When you kill any of them, you'll start getting increases to the tiers. And basically you can build up a tier just by killing enemies with the hostile modifiers. When they die, they add to those tiers, and that's just kind of permanently there. You can use an active that will eat up all of your built up tiers, or if you, for instance, log out and log in, you go away for the session, you're done with the session, and come back tomorrow, they're gone. Same as well if you go to any shared space, and also if you were to fast travel between the maps. Also, when you matchmake, if you're going into a session that wasn't on your same server pack, basically, you do get a reset there. So you generally start with what your build has, and then on top of it, you start building up as you start getting hostile modifier kills. And what do we get in return from the main modifier? As our firearms goes up, gain a critical hit chance bonus that does not count towards the critical hit chance cap. At tier 5, all ammo is refilled. So yeah, the bonuses go from tier 1, 2%, all the way up to tier 5, 10%. So we can get 10% extra crit chance. And also a very important point here, bonus, you get a crit chance bonus that does not count towards the critical hit chance cap. So this number, only this section, can go above the critical hit cap. So our cap is still 60, but the modifier can add 10 on top if we have enough space there. Because of course, if we're below 50, it'll just fill up to 60. Or if we're at 60, we'll gain more. And this is a good thing that they did, because if this wasn't here, we would have to kind of shift around builds, or maybe remove coyotes out of builds. That would be, in builds that have coyotes, but builds that are set up to be close to 60, you might have to remove a mod and then save it like that for this whole season. This going over the cap is really nice, because we don't have to reconfigure builds at all. A point here as well, and we'll discuss it later and show it as well in fact, is that this adds in after the coyote, which is very important, because if this added in first, And this would take us, for instance, if we're on 51 crit chance from a striker, if this took us to 60, the Coyote would just not be able to do anything. But the Coyote goes in first and takes us from, for instance, that 51 to 60. It still caps at 60, and then the other 10 goes on top. And we can test that actually in the game. I will show in the numbers part that we did. Then on the stamina end, we gain bonus armor for every 300k damage that you take. At tier 5, all armor kits are refilled. Also very importantly, this at tier 5, all ammo is refilled. This is once you reach tier 5, because you can also never be above tier 4. Whatever your build actually has as red cores and stuff, you will hit a maximum of tier 4, and tier 5 is only gettable by actually getting kills or activating one of the actives. So 4 is kind of our cap with the builds, and then we have to do things to get to 5, kind of like an overcharge for skill builds, for instance. But this is also one-time deal. Once we reach tier 5, all ammo is refilled. Or if we're using our active, this would, for instance, if we're using an active that would take the firearms to tier 5, it would refill our ammo. Here as well, it would refill our armor kits. This is actually kind of nice because if you used up some ammo, if you used up some med packs, and then you reach tier 5 somewhere, halfway through a mission, then you get a refill in some of these things. And there we get a bonus armor for our damage taken. This is actually an important one, especially as well for Intimidate, because this is a source for bonus armor where we don't have to actually give up anything on the gear for it. Now you still would want to, because this isn't much, 3.5% versus even the 10% of a mementos or bloodsuckers or stuff like that. This isn't much. This will just get eaten away really quickly. But if you just need to trigger Intimidate, that works out well. Also, this damage can be on the shield, which is a very important point we'll look at in a little bit when we kind of discuss it in depth. Electronics, every time a skill is used, your other skill's cooldown is reduced. Shields do not trigger this. At tier 5, all skill cooldowns are reset. So the one time we go over from 4 to 5, we get a full reset. That is also if we use our active. So we can use our active to reset our skills if we're using an active that sets it to tier 5. Just using one skill will reduce the cooldown of the other. Now, this isn't a number taken from the total skill cooldown. It is whatever it has remaining. It will remove that percentage, which means that if you just have a few seconds remaining on a skill, it's not, and it was a really long skill. So if it was just taking the 22% from the entirety of it, it would just reset it. No, it's taking 22%. 22.5 at tier 5 from just that whatever cooldown is currently going on. So it is impactful, but not as impactful as we would want it to be. But also we can use it as a skill cooldown reset. Let's take it to the actives. And on the active modifiers, we have 5 this season. You will get Broken Link starting out, even before doing any of the journey stuff that would unlock any of this. Because again, all of the, most of these modifiers are coming from the journey, but Broken Link isn't. So you do get that one. All of these do have actually are pretty powerful. They aren't that long on their cooldowns either, with most of them being 60 seconds cooldown and then a duration before that of around 25 seconds, although that does get affected by some things. Fast cooldowns, and especially the 3 that I would recommend using is using any of the links. So we have the 3 links here of Assault Link, Tech Link, and Security Link. All 3 are designed to bring a tier or an attribute to tier 5. So the Assault Link does firearms tier 5, and then this Tech Link does electronics to tier 5, and the Security Link your stamina to tier 5. And of course, having those things at tier 5 and activating them is pretty strong. With the Broken Link here, we get a freeze on all of our attributes at their current score. That's actually the case for all of them. When you activated them, for the duration of it, it freezes whatever tier you're at with all of everything. And then afterwards, it will reset back to their baseline values, because all of these as well end with once the effect ends, all attribute scores go back to their baseline values. And that is just whatever you have from gear. But here, for instance, each of them does different things, especially with the passives and actives. So let's start with Broken Link, the one you get for free. Passive modifiers values are multiplied by 2 for the duration of the multiplier, of the modifier. This means that any of those passives that you have active and are active at that time, they get multiplied by 2, and this is now 2 as well. This used to be 3 in the BTS. They fixed it to become actually 2. And then you go for a duration of 25 seconds and a cooldown of 30 seconds. So you can actually trigger this really a lot. In every minute, you can have 25 seconds uptime, 30 seconds cooldown, 25 seconds uptime. But you wouldn't want to use this one, for instance, just to lock it every time, because you would want to be higher than, for instance, 4 on some of the modifiers. And this one, though, can help at the start just to kind of help you, give you a little bit more damage. But I don't find this one worth it. Let's actually look at target rich environment next. This one is kind of a little bit like one of the ones we had last season, what marks enemies. This one, on activation, 3 unmarked enemies within 35 meters will each gain a different mark. So this is the same normal marks that we already see on the enemies. So either the red, the blue, or the yellow on the enemies with their hostile modifiers. They just 3 more go into the world. And of course, when you kill them, your tiers can go up because of that. For the next 15 seconds, all your emulations and assists will yield a ×2 attribute score multiplier. So this one doesn't lock it at whatever tier you're at. This one lets you get it up higher. And then after this time is up, all attributes are frozen at their current score, and the values of the bonuses. So yeah, this is first a 15-second time to get your attributes up. And then after that, attributes are frozen at their current score, and the values of bonuses are multiplied by 4 for 25 seconds. And yeah, this is a pretty big bonus, this part. But it's a little clunky because, yeah, when you're using it, you get a few kills. You might go up a little bit in some tiers, unless you have already also other enemies that already are marked by themselves. And then, yeah, you do get a pretty big bonus for 25 seconds, because this is those attribute values getting multiplied by 4, which isn't the passives. This is the attributes. But then also, yeah, the passive values are multiplied by 2 for the duration of the modifier. Once the effect ends, again, all attribute scores go back to their baseline values. And this one especially, if this one kind of kept up the scores afterwards, I might see it as a big. But yeah, as we kind of talked about, the Assault Link, the Tech Link, and the Skirt Link are the ones I'm going with the most. On the Assault Link, yeah, it sets our firearms to 5. So whatever we're on at the time, doesn't matter. The firearms tier goes to 5. For the duration of the ability, you gain +5 weapon damage, percent weapon damage for every non-red core equipped. And this means especially on some of, for instance, let's say a tech tank, or maybe even an Hunter's Fury, where you have 2 blue cores maybe for the shield or such. Or if you have a memento in there, which grants you 1 blue core, you do gain a little bit more weapon damage here. But also attributes are frozen and bonuses are multiplied by 4. And this is also now 4. This used to be 5. This is now working as 4. And that means that the attributes that we have in general from the global modifier, these will be ×4. So actually this +10 crit chance becomes a +40 crit chance. If you're at crit cap and you get 40 from here, which can exceed the cap, you can actually reach 100% crit chance. And that is, of course, pretty powerful. I hope I wouldn't need to explain. And yeah, that's the big bonus from there. But also our passives get multiplied by 2 here as well, gaining us a little bit from them as well. The passives this season, as we'll see in a little bit, they aren't that strong though. And then also on activation, allies within 25 meters are granted a boost to their firearm score. So you're helping out everybody around you with a little bit of a buff to their firearm score. And the modifier's duration is increased by 3 seconds for each ally nearby. So this, I haven't per se checked if this, for instance, also works with countdown being just subgroup or group. But yeah, we can gain at least, if you're in a group of 4, you can gain 9 more seconds for the duration of it. And that can be really strong, especially if, there's a bunch of people all together, everybody triggering it together for maybe killing let's say a legendary boss or something really quickly. So, and then we go on to a 60-second cooldown, and all of these. Yeah, once the effect ends, all of the scores go back to their baseline values. And that's kind of the thing with all of these. You can use the active to kind of get a ton of damage out, but then afterwards also you drop back down to the baseline values, which generally means that you won't have any of the most of the passives not active with most builds. And then on the security link, we have basically the same thing also with the 25 meters range. And here we give people stamina score. And really the big change here is that we gain total armor for every non-blue core equipped. So one thing you could consider is, for instance, on a red build, going for this. But of course, the thing is, though, that this sets our stamina attribute to tier 5. And one of the best passives, we do want to have our firearms to tier 5. But actually with the stamina to tier 5, you can actually get bonuses to, for instance, hazard protection and such for a brief time. So it can be powerful for that. So you kind of have to consider, especially with these three, which attribute you want to set to tier 5 and what you're getting from that, especially from the passives and also the main global modifier. But then together with that as well, what this bonus is. Then on the tech link, we actually gain skill efficiency for every non-yellow core equipped. Now, this is especially as well that we can get a skill tier for one of the passives, although one that requires all our attributes on tier 5. That means that we could even take out, even on builds that kind of require 6 yellow cores that aren't, for instance, running technician, mortar build, for instance, or such. But yeah, in those, if we're running, we could even remove one more core and then, for instance, rely on that. But also, yeah, in any builds that is running Memento, you would have just one skill efficiency from this anyway. And then the rest of it is similar to the rest, as we get some electronic score there as well. And then the big thing is with the actives, they give a really big buff for a short while, but then afterwards you basically go down to, just baseline values where you likely as well won't have much of the passives equipped or active. And let's go on to the passives, and we'll go through them quickly here. With most of these, you need to be on a certain tier, or for each available tier that it lists, you get a bonus. So for instance, starting here with extra padding, we gain plus 5% protection from elite per blue core while at tier 5 in stamina. So we do need to be at tier 5 to get any bonus out of this. And then this is per blue core that you have on the build. So at most, you can get 30 protection from elites from this, and that's actually very, very strong. Of course, it can be a replacement for several cores on your, or several protection from elite mods on a build, and yeah, that can make a big difference. Then the hands-on passive modifier. This is for at electronics tier 5, 50% of your current skill haste value is added as skill damage bonus. And it's straight up that. Your skill haste, 50% of it gets taken and gets added into your skill damage. This, of course, for a lot of builds that are, yellow-based skill builds, you will have some skill haste anyway. All of that while you're at electronic tier 5, and while you have that up there, then you're getting quite a big damage increase. And this can actually be quite a bit, especially for instance for a mortar build that is already designed to be skill damage and skill haste mods on top. It gains a lot of damage, and we'll actually look at some of the numbers from that in a bit, and also even some trivia with it, because you can actually reach the damage cap with a mortar build by using this in the range, with the skill haste bonus from the range. Then interference blocker. This is disrupt resistance is increased by 10% for each electronics tier. So on this one, you don't need to be at tier 5, but each tier gives 10%. And this can be very nice as well, just picking it situationally for drone builds. Even if you're just at tier 5 and you're just keeping it at that tier 5 the whole time, and you're not using the actives, for instance, you can have some skill haste going into skill damage, but then also 50% disrupt resistance just in general. You will also have 10%, of course, from your watch if you have that already, so 60%. That will actually reduce the duration of hazards from disrupts quite a bit. Then one of the big ones, especially for red builds, loaded up. This is 25% of your critical hit chance value is added as critical hit damage while at tier 5 in firearms. So again, we need to be at tier 5. It isn't per tier. Once we are at tier 5, 25% of our current crit chance, and that also includes any extra that we get from the main global modifier. If we are at 70, for instance, yeah, we get 25% of 70. And even when we hit the active and take it, for instance, to 100% crit chance, it is still 25% of that new 100%. So yeah, that can add up quite a bit, quite quickly. This is one of the main picks, especially for red builds, where, for instance, hands-on is definitely one of the main picks for yellow builds. We also have safety first, hazard protection increased by 7.5% for each stamina tier. This means also that actually if you are running, for instance, an third drone build, you could go with hands-on, interference blocker, and safety first. Once you have the stamina tiers at 5, because you will build up all of them, it isn't reliant on your build or anything. As you're getting the kills, you're just building up those tiers. You would have 50 from this at 5 electronics tier. You would have 37.5 from this at 5 stamina tiers, and then you would have another 10 from the watch, getting you to 97.5, which is enough to be disrupt resistance on yourself. So yeah, actually, for instance, for some of those things, this is very nice. This also, of course, for instance, for backfire builds, which are very prominent this season, especially as well. And this is very crit based, so anything that benefits from crit is benefiting a lot from this season. And yeah, safety first, definitely a general pick you can go with. More hazard protection never hurts. Usually it hurts less. It'll hurt shorter. But yeah, it kind of competes still, though, with, especially on a red build, with other choices. We have also specialized, so signature weapon damage is increased by 10% for each firearm tier. So up to 5 tiers, we can get 50% more out of our signature weapon damage. And this, for instance, for some of the headhunters and such, isn't a bad choice, especially with attack 50. You can get really big numbers out of attack 50, for instance, but not as a general pick one, I would say. Then we have a tier a day, and also actually, yeah, so we have two versions, kind of two categories these fall in. There's the simple and the hybrid. In these simple ones, it is just one of the tiers, one of either firearm, stamina, or electronics needs to be at 5 or have a value. It just is looking for one thing. With these hybrids, it's looking for 2 things or more. So here, for each tier in any attribute, can plus 10% total health. So this can be 150% total health because, yeah, we can have 5 tiers in each. And as long as you're not using the active to kind of reset them back down, yeah, you'll eventually reach all 5. But 150% more health, it's not a worthwhile thing to put any stock into. Multitasker is one of my picks for just general weapon builds, but also in a lot of places just for the skill tier as well. Because yeah, while we are at tier 5 in all attributes, and this one is one of the more expensive ones in this way where you have to reach tier 5 everywhere, receive plus 7.5% weapon damage. This is just pure weapon damage going into the weapon damage category or the weapon damage stat. Plus 85% or plus 85,000 max armor and a skill tier. This skill tier is really valuable, of course, and can make things, a lot more powerful, just especially as well. For instance, capacitor can gain a little bit from this on builds where we're kind of maining the capacitor already. This extra skill tier gives more damage, and the 7.5 actually combined gives basically a red core's worth because we would get 7.5% there and 7.5% there. But yeah, that skill tier, even for red builds, is a really powerful thing. Just even one more tier on your shield without having to spend much. Supportive is basically the healer pick. While at least tier 3 in both stamina and electronics, your outgoing and incoming repairs are increased by 25%. Now you could also use this for the incoming repair and use it to bump that up a little bit, but it isn't. This still doesn't make enough of a difference to, for instance, make a self-healing build where you're using healing and incoming repair, you could actually mess around with that a little bit. But this is especially for the outgoing repair to other allies, where I feel this will fit in the easiest, especially for instance for measured assembly builds, MA builds. This could be a really good pick, as they will also likely have a blue core or two, because they will gain skill tiers from their gear set abilities. So then we have tech upgrades. Well, at least a tier 3 in both firearms and electronics, your skill duration is increased by 25% of your current critical hit damage value. So this is taking from critical hit damage value 25% and then just going into skill duration. Skill duration isn't that useful. There isn't many places where we care about skill duration, and most of the places where we do, for instance, Oxy and stuff, they wouldn't have much in the form of critical hit damage value anyway. What you could do though is, for instance, on a dedicated Oxy build, for especially ones that are just there to just do a thing, for instance, on Incursion, where, skill duration does matter a little bit, but you wouldn't per se wait for charges to come back. You're just basically wiping and resetting after or wiping and then getting pulled to the next checkpoint just as a reset. But you're basically firing out your charges. That's all you're doing, and then that's enough to kill the turrets. You could go crit damage instead of the skill haste that we would generally take on some of the pieces, and then 25% of that goes into skill duration, but it seems like more hassle than it is worth. I don't think that would really gain you anything, because already, Oxys can do it fine there. But that's kind of, it isn't a great pick altogether. Although as well, for turret drone hybrids, having this as skill duration kind of makes sense, except it's competing with other things that add more damage. And then the last one as well that I would pick for red builds quite often is the best kind of defense. Well, at least at tier 3 in both firearms and stamina, gain 2 plus 2.5% headshot damage for every 100% total or 100k total armor you have. This is just looking at how much armor you have, and especially with a graded build, and that's kind of how we're going to be looking at it today, because if you have some grading, you will be able to reach 800k. It is kind of nice from PTS to here. They've changed it to be, instead of 5% for every 200,000, they've made it 2.5% for every 100,000. That means that even if you're going 100k up in armor, you are benefiting from that as well. You don't need to have the new threshold of 200k, which means that even at 700k, which most of us will have on a character with the full watch, you start with 660 as the base without any blue cores, of course, and then you go to 726 with the watch fully there. So that already gets you 17.5. But if you have grading on top, you can go exceed 800, and then you get 20%. And 20% headshot damage is actually kind of worthwhile. We've looked at all of the actives and passives and such. Let's go look at the hostiles. And let's actually discuss the hostile modifiers, as we've been discussing them kind of already with the other parts. But the marks that enemies get, so electronics marks, firearm mark, and stamina mark, that's just marks above their head. Once you have the modifier turned on, the global modifier turned on, you will start seeing enemies spawn with these marks above their head. We saw one of the actives can create more marks, but basically it's just that when you kill enemies with those marks, that's where you're getting your attribute tiers from. So as you kill enemies, you'll start filling up on the attribute tiers, but those also signify enemies that have bonuses to them. So actually, let's look at the firearms one first. So if they have a red mark above their head, the marked enemy gains plus 15% weapon damage and plus 20% movement speed. So they move faster and shoot harder. This 15%, it is kind of hard to test, but I almost feel it's maybe even more. Now, we just got a patch. I haven't really played too much in this patch yet. They might have altered this maybe and fixed this or something in the background without it being in the patch notes. But this almost feels closer to 30% extra damage. It feels almost like we're getting shot by enemies while not per se wearing glass, but it's closer to glass than not, I feel. But in either case, we need to respect these enemies, and this is kind of the thing as well with all of the modifiers. We gain some bonuses, and the enemies get some bonuses. Now, last season, that was Frenzy. That was just one enemy hostile modifier. And that was especially regen, and they did more damage and such. Here we don't have the regen anymore, which is kind of nice. And also, yeah, eliminating or assisting in eliminating a marked enemy with the firearms mark yields some firearms score. Now, this assisting, this also seems to be if you're just basically, you know, in the group, once kills happens, you don't per se need to hit the enemy. It's just if a group member kills them, it already counts as assisting. And yeah, the red ones, especially for instance, if you are fond of tech tanks and such, you do need to watch out a little bit for the red ones. The movement speed isn't too bad, but the damage, increased damage that they have, especially if there's multiple enemies with red, sometimes I go like, wait, why is my shield melting? And then I look up, oh, there's like 3 enemies with red marks. And yeah, I quickly find out that that they can hurt quite a lot. On the blue end, with their stamina mark, marked enemies gain overheal, and their critical hit damage against them basically is reduced by 20% on this enemy. Now, with today's patch, as I'm recording, which came out exactly today, this went from 35% to 20%. Now, this is actually a pretty big nerf to the enemy, basically. But this is also just critical hit damage. So any shots that you're putting towards them, for instance, if it's a pesty tick or if it's a fire from a fire eclipse, if you're headhunting and doing just headshot damage, none of those are reduced. But for instance, with determined or well with headhunter, you would still have to deal with the overheal because yeah, those enemies also will have basically in the same way as with ragers or such, they basically have an extra bar underneath their health bar with an extra amount of damage that you need to go through. And that can make a difference for headhunting, but especially it's a critical hit damage reduction, which also means for skills and stuff don't actually get negated by this much. And in the same way, whenever you kill them, you gain, yields some stamina score. So this is how you're getting your tiers up, is by killing enemies with those marks. The electronics mark is especially against skills, but also just general damage reduction. So the marked enemy takes minus 33% damage from skills, and also minus 33% damage to weak points. This is just generally to weak points. So especially trying to break a weak point on something that is yellow marked does take a little bit more damage. Well, a third basically. And also while their damage, while their gadgets are deployed, they take minus 33% damage, and this is just any damage. And this is especially important if they have the blue and the yellow and they have a skill out. So if it's, for instance, an engineer, once they put their turret down, they have this their gadget out and they take minus 32% and minus 20% from the crits, and that can add up and make it kind of hard to kill them. With this as well, it makes sense to go for their proxy, shoot out the turret, shoot out the RC car and blow it up and remove this and then hunt the enemy. This is also very much a thing, for instance, the Black Tusk controllers with their mini tanks. They have their mini tank out always. Same for the outcast ladies that have their RC cars with the razor blades, the lawnmowers out. So this can be actually a pretty big reduction, especially if it's together with the blue. And then, killing any of those gets us some electronic score. So all of these together are actually pretty strong. An enemy marked with all 3, especially if you get it like on a boss or something, can hurt quite a bit. If you get it on a legendary boss, this can be deadly. But you kind of have to deal with it. None of it is per se too hard for just general play. And it's kind of as a balancing factor. We gain actually more damage than some of these reductions, especially when we hit the active. But even without the active and just having the passives up, we can get more damage than the reductions of these most of the times. And then especially when you run into an enemy that has like blue and yellow active and has the yellow also with a skill out, that enemy might take longer, but on everybody else, you're killing faster. And overall, the modifier still will be faster than without the modifier. So also to show this a little bit in action, here we have an enemy with a mark above their head. And they have a red and a yellow mark. So they have reduction if they were to put a proxy out. They have reduction to skill damage, and well, they have no weak points nor a skill. So they can't have that out, but they do more damage just with the red, and they have more movement speed because of that as well. When we kill them, you notice that we have now on the side of my ammo, for instance, where normally we have the ammo, we have 3 new icons there. So that's the tiering, and the number in them is the tiers that they are. Now, every build will start with a certain amount in there. It is dependent on your cores. You cannot exceed 4. Even if you have 6 red cores, you will only reach tier 4 or starting out, and then you need to kill enemies for that number to go up beyond that. Any enemy that isn't marked will not add anything into there. So when we kill, all of these guys that aren't marked, nothing goes up. When I kill this guy, our yellow there is pretty close to being a new tier. I can't really read the number in there. It's 1. Yellow on white is, yeah, that should have some shadowing around it. But when I kill this guy, I will likely go to 2. Yeah, which we did there. And our blue went up, of course, as well. One of the things is sometimes the marking on the enemies, kind of like with last season, although Frenzy would show up basically always because of the way the graphical effect is set up. But sometimes you will kill enemies and get a bonus and not actually like it would feel as if you shouldn't be getting one. The thing is that, yeah, those icons still sometimes break. So yeah, here we have multiple reds. We're already in the tier 4s, and as we kill enemies, we just build it up. It doesn't decay. It doesn't decay in any form. It will only go away if you use active, or if you, for instance, if I from here fast travel to DC, or if I go to a shared space like a safe house or such. It's basically the same rule set as memento pickups, for instance. Wherever you would lose memento pickups, you will lose this as well. And yeah, as we keep killing, so for instance here, we've killed a few, and already we're, in the second room kind of this mission, a short mission in Brooklyn. We're already in a build that starts with tier 3 on the reds. We're already full on the red. So now loaded up that I have equipped is now active, because yeah, that requires tier 5. And I have multitasker equipped. That will not be active until all 3 are at tier 5. And then the other one will also actually be active, because we need tier 3 in red and blue. And yeah, we do have that. And yeah, I keep calling them kind of red, blue, and yellow. But actually, yeah, technically they are firearms firearms stamina electronics, the stats from Div 1. But even in Div 1, I kind of call them red, red, yellow, and blue. One thing you might notice here is, yeah, you might get a bunch of enemies in a row that won't have markings. Also, the markings by themselves, of course, just being above the head of the enemy means that you kind of know where the enemies are. It's kind of, especially with patrols, for instance, out in the open worlds, kind of like with Polarity or Guardians or such, there's icons above their heads, so you kind of know that there is an enemy coming or there is a patrol over there, because one of them will likely be marked. And yeah, as we keep killing, here, for instance, as well, we're gonna, and yeah, once we're at tier 5, that's the maximum, but there our yellow is now also on 3. So as we go, we get those numbers up, and it doesn't really go away until we activate an active. And yeah, it's the same way as well. So to activate an active, which on PC is T, when we hit that, we activate it. Now, I have the yellow one equipped because I was running a skill build earlier. But here, then we would go, that goes to 5 as well. Whatever other one was gets locked in for the duration of it. And the buff bar actually shows us the duration and the cooldowns of them. But yeah, it only shows it as well still when you ADS, which is actually a thing I kind of liked last season, that they were always there, but it's still kind of fine. And then once that is done, we go back to our baseline values of this build. And this is then 3, 2, and a 1, which makes sense. This is a tech tank. And yeah, with this, yeah, we have basically, we can count it from here, how many tiers we have. Although actually here I realize now that, yeah, it doesn't show the skill tier from Technician, nor the skill tier from the brand bonuses. It's only showing the memento one here with one tier there. But even if we equip a full red build, we only go to 4. So you never can start just on 5. You need to either use an active or actually just play for a bit. And then the 2 main ways of kind of using it is either you just fill up all to 5 and make use of the passives quite consistently, or you use your active a lot and then you get the bonuses from the active for those times, but then the rest of the time you're just kind of your normal damage levels. So yeah, two ways to kind of go about it. And now that we know what all of the pieces do, and then also a little bit how it actually works by looking at it in the game, let's go to some of the numbers. For that, I've prepared this spreadsheet. I will link to it, of course, in the description. So yeah, you can go and watch it at or go through it at your own leisure. And through this, yeah, we have several multi-calculators kind of set up, and even a little section on skill damage, even though I'm not per se doing skill damage calculations here. And yeah, we're going to go through all of these, and it'll be timestamped as well in between, as we're going to look at what, for instance, first the modifier can do for a full red striker build, then also actually looking at the backfire and especially getting some of the hazard protection as well for the backfire through the modifiers, and especially as well we are getting crit chance, of course, that makes it a little bit stronger. What can we get from the PFE, and then also actually strained, and here as well we're kind of looking at strained and measured and seeing if maybe strained is better than measured for this season with 70 crit chance. I didn't know, and let's find out together in a second. And then also actually how much do we gain, for instance, yeah, with killer especially as well, because of course killer also a big crit damage component there. But yeah, let's go get started with this first one. And let's start here by looking at a striker here with Obliterate and Coyote, just to kind of show the build that we're using as the baseline here. Just a bog standard striker, Obliterate Chest, Coyote with a Lexington as the weapon in there. Now, of course, the weapon and stuff doesn't per se matter. The layout of the build does a little bit, because it depends on how much, for instance, we're gaining from the weapon damage from Multitasker. Or if we have more headshot, how much we're gaining from the best kind of defense. And of course, how much crit damage we have will affect both the main modifier and subsequent parts. If we go back to this multi-calculator, and yeah, as well, these are multi-calculators of my design. We're comparing up to 10 builds here. Input happens down here, output happens out here. And what we're especially getting out is a burst and a sustained DPS number, together with some checking numbers, so I can actually check that we've input everything correctly, and I've done so already, of course. If we kind of look at just the baseline of that build here, without actually including the weapon damage talent in there, also, we're already setting it to a grade 25 and a headshot rate of 20%. We're keeping the DTA rate on 0%. Doesn't matter. These are all the same weapon types, weapon classes, and because of that, you know, that doesn't matter there, and we're keeping DTUC up. If we have the Obliterate Coyote just as the baseline, when we just even have that tier 4 on top, so we just gain a little bit of crit chance by just reaching tier 4, although it is a full red build, so as we saw, actually, it will start on tier 4 with the modifiers on, and that means that we're already gaining 4%, and that's just that extra crit chance here that comes in with. That already raises our damage by 4%, and that is actually not insignificant. It isn't the most. This season isn't as strong as, especially for instance, the first season with By the Teeth and such. And also last season was pretty strong, especially because of the CC and the amount of CC that we had. We weren't actually doing that crazy amounts of damage, but it was especially that, yeah, we were doing, we were having a really good uptime on it, especially with microwave coils. And also, yeah, we were doing a lot of CC by just pulsing and such. Here, the damages are a little bit more restrained. Here as well, once we reach tier 5 and we have 10 crit chance from the modifier, we're gaining that 10% crit chance extra, means we're doing 7.34% damage extra here. This is also very much reliant on how much headshot rate we put here, because actually if I take this to 100%, because crit damage and headshot are additive to each other, they pool together before they multiply against the rest. That means that what number we pick for this really does affect the outcome here. Because yeah, as we see now, it's dropped by quite a bit, but I'm just picking 20% as my just general guideline. I feel 20% is a good representation of if we're trying what we can reach, and especially in a lot of places we can exceed 20% by quite a lot. If we're kind of close up to, let's say, a raid boss or an incursion boss, and we're just unloading on their face, we're doing much more than 20. If we're just doing maybe some control points and we don't want to rush out there and such, maybe we're doing as little as 5% or something if we're not closing the distance. But yeah, we're just picking 20, arbitrary number, but a better representation, I feel, at least than 100% for especially these kind of calculations. And then here we're adding in loaded up. Loaded up was the extra crit damage. So it would take 25% of your crit chance number and pump that directly into your crit damage number. So if we just have tier 5 plus loaded up, so yeah, we are at 70 crit chance, and it is taking 70, or it's taking 25% of that 70, adding that in here for an extra 17.5 there, crit damage. And yeah, our damage goes up then by 13%. So this is already once we reach firearms tier 5, this is basically we're gaining 13% on top just from the modifier. Now, this is, of course, still, if it's getting reduced by 20% on blue enemies, or, well, in the past, even 35% on blue enemies, the blue enemies will still take longer to kill than than not having the modifier on at all. But, of course, all the other enemies would be dying a lot faster anyway. So, yeah, I kind of like that. What this kind of shifts up in is that, yeah, we can gain a decent amount more damage, but on the downside of it is also some enemies, but not all enemies, but just some enemies, will have more resistances, and because of that, it kind of shifts it up. Now you have to deal kind of like, oh, okay, there's one strong enemy. Do I take him first, or do I leave him for last? Do I just clear out the numbers, or maybe if it's on a medic, it's still worth it to kind of deal with them? And actually, that kind of head play is, being in that kind of mind space and playing around with that. That's actually what I really enjoy about the modifiers, and they've kind of been, especially for instance last season as well, pretty much there. And I've quite enjoyed running the whole season with them on. Then here, multitasker just by itself, or what, multi-tier 5, and then plus on that multitasker. So if we have both the crit chance bonuses and just multitasker, but we don't have loaded up or such, we'll combine them all together. And that's also here kind of what I'm combining here into the weapons pack. So loaded up, multitasker, and the best kind of defense, I feel, are the 3 picks. If you're just picking stuff for a red build, that's the 3 I would pick. More crit damage, especially loaded up, a big damage boost. Multitasker, that weapon damage is there. Not the biggest boost as we see here, because yeah, versus just tier 5. Because here on this side, these dark gray ones, we're just comparing just against tier 5. Because yeah, for all of these, we would generally be on tier 5 anyway. We would need to reach that point for loaded up. And likely by the time we have tier 5 there, we also have tier 5 in the other, or well, by the time we have tier 5 on a yellow or a blue, especially on this build, we would have tier 5 already on the red, of course. That's the first one that's going to likely fill up because that one's going to start pretty high. But yeah, loaded up basically is adding like 5.5%. Multitasker with its 7.5 weapon damage part only, basically in here, it's already still adding 2.9%. 7.5 weapon damage isn't a lot, but it's still 3% more damage. It is there. When we add them all together, then yeah, we're gaining a lot. But of course, with that multitasker as well, you're gaining that skill tier, and the skill tier is very nice. Just an extra skill tier for your shield, a little bit extra duration for your pulses and such, and yeah, that can make a difference. An extra charge for a chem, a fire chem, or foam chem. Well, foam chem most likely. And then the best kind of defense, which we're shortening here to TB COD. That one is the headshot, the extra headshot. Here, especially with the 20% headshot rate, we're kind of reducing its impact. We're gaining still, though, 1.81%. Still, overall, one of the better picks if we're just upping our damage. But especially versus this best kind of defense, I wouldn't be, I wouldn't feel bad about running, for instance, extra PFE or running the extra hazard protection that we saw that we can take as well. So you could go either of those routes as well. I would definitely say loaded up is definitely one to grab. Multitasker and best kind of defense, you could argue to maybe go for more survivability. But here, of course, if we're just looking at the damage numbers, yeah, we can gain a little bit more from that. Let's actually look at it from 100% headshot rate. Then it is actually 7%. So yeah, when we're actually headshotting fully, if we, the times we are actually hitting our headshots, we're doing 7% more. But if we're averaging it out to 1 in 5 shots being a headshot, then it hurts a little bit more. So you kind of have to decide as well, especially if you're maybe running it with, let's say, Bighorn. Although Bighorn would affect these numbers as well because it also is feeding into the headshot pool. But Bighorn, for instance, yeah, if you're already going for headshots, best kind of defense might be a pretty good pick there as well. And then the combined weapon pack. So yeah, that loaded up multitasker, best kind of defense, all together. I'm calling that the weapon pack. All together with tier 5 up, yeah, we're gaining about 20% on the original build. So, and even versus just the tier 5, we're gaining about 10.5% on top of just the tier 5. So the tier 5 is getting us like 7%, and then this is getting us around 10 and a bit percent, here 7 and a bit percent, for a combined here of 18.64%. Close to 20%. It isn't a bad deal once you have everything charged up, and you can just keep those, of course, for most of your play session. Getting just 20% more damage, yeah, that's actually pretty worthwhile. If we also then look at it, once we actually trigger an active on top of this, so if we have the active, and the active is now 4 times, it used to be 5 times in the PTS, they have actually fixed that. And once we trigger the active, and here just active with the loaded up, and also then, yeah, the tier 5. So if we're just taking the firearms one, and we're continuously just hitting, we don't keep all of them up, so we can't have all of them, but we're just triggering that firearms one, and just getting ourselves loaded up triggered, because that needs tier 5. Tier 5 then also gets us the 70 crit chance. So if we have those combined, although, well, with the active up, while it is up, it also is multiplying those, of course, by 4 for the 10% crit chance, and then also the crit damage from that is also multiplied by 2. So actually what we get is actually on the stat sheet, we see 91 crit chance, and because the stat sheet actually does show the bonuses that you're getting with the modifier, and we have 191 crit damage. What we actually see in the game, though, is if we fire at a target, and this is a build with a coyote, we do not see any non-crits. And even with 90%, 91% crit chance, we would be expecting to see a non-crit. You know, 1 in 10 shots should be a non-crit on average. We can empty out multiple mags and see that we don't see a single non-crit, which means that the coyote, which doesn't show up in these stats, actually is going in first. So that is taking us to 60. We're gaining the 40 on top of that. So it is actually these numbers. And we do see it being these numbers as well, with the crit damage, especially side of it as well, that it is in the game. But of course, crit chance, we can only really say from just looking at the results and like averaging them out. But there not being a single non-crit when you have the active means that, yeah, coyote is going in first. That is taking us to 60, and then on top of that, the other 40 comes in. And when we have that active and just loaded up by itself, we can have 150%. So for 25 seconds, every 60 seconds, or even a little bit more, if you're triggering it with allies nearby, you could have 150%. So you could actually even make a case for this, just running around every 25 seconds, triggering this, and then just dropping back down to the baseline. Because after that, you would drop down to this tier 4 number, which is also still 4% ahead of just a normal build without the modifiers on. And then if we have it actually up when we have all the tier as well. So first we have charged up all of these tiers. We've gained the full weapon pack by getting all the tiers up, because especially for multitasker, we need everything to be in tier 5. If we have that, and then we trigger the active, which does lock it in, of course, we gain 170%, because all of those other passives that are in there now as well, those are getting doubled as well, multiplied by 2. And yeah, that is a big number. 170%, like this is really jumping up to a much bigger number than it used to be, of course. And that is the thing with this season. You either run it kind of passively and just have the passive bonuses active most of the time, and once you kind of reach tier 5 and everything, you can have a pretty big damage bonus. Or once in a while you trigger the active, or well, continuously you trigger the active, and you have basically 150%. You know, you have 53% more damage when the active is up, and you drop back down to just, 4% more when it isn't in between in the cooldown. So you can just keep triggering this with activities and such. I could definitely see that working out. Or even on top of that, let's say you have everything already at 5, and then you trigger it, you get a really big increase, and this, of course, could be a killer for, let's say, a legendary boss or such. So yeah, these are impactful. They aren't as big passively as last season. Last season was definitely pretty strong. The season before that would bite the teeth even more so. But yeah, these are still pretty strong. And from that striker, let's go to a completely different striker here set up for a Backfire. If we take it into the game, this is the version we're going with. This is a striker set up to be 90% general hazard protected, and then there is one bleed mod in here for 100% hazard protection against the Backfires, of course, damage here. Now, nowadays, you can actually run the Backfire very easily without without these, as yeah, once you reach 100 stacks, actually, it doesn't bleed you anymore. That still does hurt, reaching up to that point, but it's not as bad, especially now as well. It's half of your armor, 50% of your armor at max stacks, not 100% as it used to be. And at 100 stacks of the Backfire, this build does really well, especially as well with the striker at 100 stacks on top of that, of course. And that's also what we're setting up kind of here with the Obliterate version. There's also, of course, a Ninja Bike version that is quite popular nowadays. I've kind of looked into it recently, and we'll look into it even more with the build collection updates. But yeah, going Ninja Bike and a piece of Cavalier versus this build, you basically lose around 10-ish%, a little bit over 10-ish% in damage at max stacks. But what you then gain is a blue and a yellow core, which can be worthwhile for instance, a shield or such. If you are going full red, go this route, I would say. If you want to have, for instance, yeah, a shield alongside of it, which definitely isn't a bad idea, especially with a striker shield here, the firewall specific shield. Yeah, the Ninja Bike is actually not that bad of an idea for this build. But still, this build does do like 10-12% more damage at full stacks than the Ninja Bike version. So we are taking this one as our numbers, as our baseline numbers, because I kind of like the red version. If we take it back to the spreadsheet, so yeah, that's that Backfire 3.13, that's the number of it in the build collection. If we just have 10% more crit chance with tier 5 crit chance, tier 5 of the firearms giving us 10% crit chance, already we're seeing a 10% increase in that in our damage, which is a lot more than we saw with the striker, going from it to a tier 5 with the crit chance there. We're gaining 7%, here we're gaining 10%. And of course makes a lot of sense because we're using the Backfire here as well at 100 stacks, set in as at 100 stacks, meaning that we're gaining a lot of crit damage from that. And then yeah, the more crit chance we have, especially talents that are very reliant on crits, benefit a lot from that. Here's what we do have the option to take the stacks up and down. If we take it actually to 0 stacks, we see that it isn't that big of an increase. So yeah, it is, of course, as we build it up, we're gaining quite a bit more from it. If we take it back to 100 stacks, we see as well that with loaded up on top, because yeah, we got tier 5 plus loaded up doesn't add in as much. So we're gaining more from the crit chance part of it, because of course, you know, we have a pretty high crit damage number at 100 stacks. But actually our crit damage number is really high. And because of that, the loaded up, which feeds into crit damage, actually we're not getting that much from it. Still worthwhile to put in another 4.5%, 4.3%, or well, 4%, let's say, damage. That's still worthwhile. It's just one passive, so you would want that in there. And when we trigger it with the active as well and take it to 100% crit chances and such, then we see pretty big returns. But actually what we see is that it's less returns than we would see from the striker, because the striker was going to 150-ish%. This is not being with all 5, but this is basically competing to this, so 153% there. Here though, we aren't with just active and loaded up. And that's of course because, yeah, we're pushing that crit damage number into really heavily diminished returns. We're really not seeing the returns there that we would, you know, when we are this high up in the air. So yeah, it's still though worthwhile, yeah, here and there triggering an active, or even running it with the active. Although of course with the stacking mechanics of both Backfire and Striker, you kind of want the continuity of this. But then also we have safety first, and safety first for every tier of it, we're gaining 7.5% with each stamina tier. And that gets us at tier 5 of blue. We're getting 37.5% general hazard protection. What we can use that for is actually to take out 4, a bleed mod and then 3 hazard protection mods. Because actually to be bleed immune for the Backfire, all we need is 95. Because it is 20 ticks of it. So it basically, if we're reduced, what we have to do is reduce it to less than, or it's 10 seconds worth. What we need to do is reduce it to less than 0.5 of a second, so half of a second. When you reduce it beyond that, that means that it will not actually trigger the effect. That is how hazard protection works, and also how hazard immunity works. You don't actually need 100%. For the Backfire, it being 10 seconds, for us to reduce it to below 0.5 seconds, we need 95%. And yeah, once we have 95%, we're kind of free of that. But that also means that with 37.5%, we can actually remove 40% and still be hazard immune or bleed immune at least. What we see then is if we take that, what we get actually is, of course, a little bit more crit in return. What we can put in there is then, in effect, 4 more crit damage rolls. Now, our crit is already really high, but if we're kind of comparing it here to the original number, we can already gain from that as well another 9%. And this is all against these original number here. Yeah, we can gain, quite a bit above it just from those 2 modifiers. So especially with this build, going with those 2 modifiers is a really good choice. Here, though, we're on a full red build. It's going to take a little bit of time to build up to 5 tiers of blue. So you might choose to go for less or such, just so you have it earlier. But reaching tier 5 also doesn't take too long, as we kind of saw, going through even 2-3 rooms. Even for a full red build, we were already reaching pretty high there, depending on how lucky you get with the spawns. It is basically RNG. But that would mean maybe running a different weapon for a little bit, getting those few kills in then, and then for the rest of the session, basically keeping the Backfire. But the thing is, though, that if you're just going to main the Backfire still, that hazard protection coming in from blues might mean that you might be better off adding in a few blue cores in here, and then just having a consistent value that you can already play with. But that would, of course, lower the damage by a lot if we're taking this weapon damage out. And then also we might lean more towards having maybe a ninja bike in there. But yeah, altogether, we're reaching a much bigger number than our original, just without any modifier number. Also, between these, yeah, we gain about the same amount, but a little bit more once we have that safety first from between these steps. So, especially with the Backfire, it does make a lot of sense to, yeah, the Backfire makes a lot of sense for this season. That's why you've seen it around as much as you have, likely. And especially going also with safety first to gain a little bit more crit damage from there as well. Really a good play to do with it. And here another special thing we can look at is with extra padding, we can gain some PFE. In this case, we have to be at tier 5 in stamina tier 5 for it to activate. And then we gain per blue core that we have 5 PFE. So here we're kind of taking this PFE build, although actually we're doing it a little bit differently. Here I want to keep the chest and backpack 3000. Also for PFE builds, I like having around 3 blue cores, 4 blue cores at most for general play. But if we look at this with 5 blue cores, which I don't have here per se, but if it was, then we would gain, once we reach tier 5 in stamina, we would gain 25. Now that one is a little bit more impactful once we can gain 25, because yeah, with 15, it's still, you might take it on top, but it's not that valuable. If we take it back here, we're calculating it up with the numbers as if it would be 5 blue cores. But then, of course, this extra PFE only comes in once you reach stamina tier 5, which means that if you're just putting on a build just to fight rogues, let's say, because that's usually where I pull out my PFE, is like in a mission, it goes rogue agents detected, I just grab my PFE and really make that fight not per se fast. It would be much faster on whatever build I'm likely on, but more consistent. It's basically guaranteed that I'm going to win that fight. But when we're loading it in, we would, for instance, even if that had 5 blue cores, we would start with 3.5 tiers. So we would need to get some kills first before that would be active. And that's, of course, by that time, we're already past the rogues, right? So this one is a little bit more situational, but if you're kind of running a PFE for, let's say, a mission, you have to kind of be cognizant of, yeah, I need to reach tier 5 first, or I need to use my active for when I need it. or just, yeah, kind of use it passively and just have the passive modifier just be up the whole time. Because, yeah, it isn't always active, but it will activate over a little bit right into your mission. So you could likely play a little bit more safe if you're, for instance, using this for master missions, for something where PFE builds do get used quite a bit. You might play the first few rooms a little quieter or a little slower, or maybe go do a few activities before you go into the master mission, because it doesn't reset at the start of a mission or anything. You could just go do a few activities, be at 5, and then go into the master mission. And when you do gain a little bit of damage. It isn't significant, of course. We're just replacing, in effect, 2 blue cores, or, well, 2 PFE is going into becoming 2 crit damage mods in this case. And yeah, 24 crit damage gains us just this 6.85% or 6.58%. If you were to run this, for instance, just for that 15, maybe, or with the 3 blue cores, just for 15, this would kind of be halved by that, of course. It is still more damage and definitely a pick to take. I don't think it's really handy for dedicated PFE builds, because we usually pull those out for specific fights. We don't go kind of, I don't generally run them. It's more for rogues, or if we're doing something where we know there's going to be a lot of elites around, for instance, or in countdown or such. By the time of extraction, you would likely have this up, I would say as well. So for there, it might work. But yeah, for general play, I feel it's more useful actually for people running red builds and just having a little bit more PFE. But yeah, we can gain a little bit more there. Let's go on to the next one. And let's also quickly look at several weapon talents, which are also, of course, kind of affected by this. One of my main questions was especially looking at just on Striker with Strained. Would Strained make sense? Here, though, with just still the Lexington. Now, of course, with Strained, we could go with lower RPM weapons to kind of maybe improve it a little bit. But the Lexington is so far ahead that doesn't work out anyway. So yeah, we're still taking the Lexington. And generally as well, Strained was already ahead of Optimus, even on higher RPM weapons. I know that fallacy still goes around of like, although nowadays they aren't relevant anymore, but in the past of like Strained is better on low RPM weapons and such. No, Strained used to beat Optimus even on a FAMAS. It wasn't more so till it was much more affected by firing time, and that became much more of an issue, for instance, with a Vector 45, which is firing at 1200 RPM, but also has 5 rounds less. Like that 5 rounds less actually matters quite a bit there as well. That aside, Strained. If we take Strained, and I especially add in just Strained itself, so we're going up against just in the middle here, we have the Obliterate Coyote. And actually, we're doing a little bit of a weird thing here, but that's just because I added them in later, but might be a little bit confusing. But we're going up into Measured, and then Measured plus Tier 5. And down here, we're going into Strained and Strained plus Tier 5. So we can kind of compare them on either sides. And the main is just 100% point is just this Obliterate Coyote, just without the weapon damage talent included into there. So once we have just normal Strained, this would be around 8%. And this is with 20% headshot rate. And then Measured, especially with the high grading that we have here as well, we are going into the 10.91% that we kind of have here. So we're going 11%-ish from Measured normally, and then Strained normally, because this is before the modifier, we're gaining 18 or 8%. If we account for that extra 10 crit chance, now that doesn't affect Measured that much, because Measured is especially going into the total weapon damage, the weapon damage, and the rate of fire, but it is still, of course, gaining just 10% more crit chance, and is already critting, so it's just critting more. But of course, Strained is affected by it. So what we see then there as well is this here, the top one, Measured with the 10% extra crit chance from a Tier 5 firearms, is going to 19% from that 10%, 11%. This Strained is gaining more in percentages or in relation, just going to that extra Tier 5, but it still doesn't beat the Measured. Because yeah, it's going to this 17.4%. So it is a big improvement for it, just having that extra 10% crit chance, and makes it competitive actually with Measured, I would say. But I would still pick Measured over it, because this was the question that I would had here, is just like, is it worth running Strained this season, especially if we're just keeping it on the Tier 5? Now, when you push it with the active, we do gain quite a bit there. And we don't have it on the inverse side here, but yeah, especially with the actives up, it does exceed what measured would add in, of course. So if you're using the actives quite a bit, strength can make some sense, especially when we're moving it to, let's say, an MG5 or such, which I'm not doing here. And we might look at that in the future a little bit, because I might have a follow-up video for this, but we'll see, as I have a lot of video ideas. But yeah, when the active is up, then strained, when we're going to 100% crit chance, yeah, it's pulverizing measured. But I feel for general use, I'm still going to go with measured over strained, also because measured is just basically always active. Strained, of course, when you stop firing, if you're going from target to target, or the target is hiding for, just for 2 seconds because you accidentally suppressed them, then you're losing that bonus. You're dropping back down, and then you're building back up strain. So especially there, yeah, I feel measured still has it. We also kind of then go look at killer for a second, because that's of course the other one that can gain quite a lot. Killer's numbers here, just going into killer, yeah, the normal numbers that we see, 20%-ish from killer. Then only having the crit chance tier 5, so this would just be the gain that we would see without killer active. That would be 7%. So we have basically the base constituents of what we're going to look at here, which is killer plus crit chance there. And what we see actually is that the sum is larger than the parts, because of course we're putting in a little bit into crit chance. We're gaining, when we get that 10% more, we're gaining 7% from that. When we're putting in 70 crit damage, we're gaining 20% from that. But with the both combined, yeah, they're multiplying against each other. So we're getting this 31%. And that is a pretty big buff, of course, especially for killer. Yeah, when you are on tier 5, you're basically doing 10% more damage, with just because of that 70 crit chance. And yeah, that is a big jump. So yeah, especially with killer and such, that does get affected by this. And this is kind of the thing with this season's modifier as well. It's having a lot of crit components. A lot of things with crit are affected by this. And then, yeah, when we take it, especially with also the actives up and active with just loaded up, we're already pushing way beyond the initial numbers of the striker obliterate. And then, of course, on top of that, the weapon pack does even more so if you do have it on all tier 5s when you trigger the active. Let's take 1 second here as well, just to look very briefly at some skills. And we'll briefly look at hands-on as well. Although, yeah, we're not going to use a full spreadsheets or anything for that, just to kind of show what the increase is of it. We might actually come back around and kind of look at this. And together with that, actually, I want to make a calculator for the skill damages and such. But what we have here is 2 variants, although actually it's not the build we're going to see in a second. It is actually the explosive build on character 5 on the build collection. And this is the mortar hitting. And the mortar build, of course, has a decent amount of skill haste. So we're in there going from 6.3 million per hit, because we have 134 skill haste, and we're getting 50% of that back into our skill damage. And then actually here as well, I'm just hitting the active, which is multiplying that by 2. So we're getting 100% back in skill haste into skill damage. That number goes up by quite a bit. And we suddenly go from 6.3s into the 10 millions. And this was, just with the backpack talent up and not even in sync triggered. And that is actually a 67% increase. So a 2/3 increase because of that extra skill haste there. If we take it into the game, I actually have this one at the ready, which is the somewhat improved version over it, which is the explosive build, but then with the sacrifice. This one does have actually 1 skill haste less, but has that DTA on it. And yeah, if we take just our numbers here, and actually, do I have damage numbers enabled? I do not. Let's quickly do that. We need the second hit anyway, because on the first hit, I'm triggering my shock and awe, and on the second hit, it is active. So this number, whatever we hit here for, is this 661, and this is, of course, with that in sync or capacitor up. Now, I have the passive, we're going to equip the passive of course, of hands-on here, especially as well for skill builds. This plus especially safety first and interference blocker can actually be really good picks. The multitasker as well, just for that extra skill tier, can be quite useful. One thing you can do is also after you have actually reached tier 5 is, for instance, have this running before that and have some extra hazard protection for just disrupt protection. Once you're tier 5 on everything, then come in here and swap this to this and have multitasker up for extra skill tier. But yeah, especially interference blocker for disrupt resistance, of course, makes a lot of sense. But hands-on is a really powerful tool, because actually what we're going to see here in a second is once I have it up, and then also I'm going to activate my active. So we're going to fire one, just actually already trigger shock and awe. Now I'm going to trigger my active, and now we're going to shoot again. And of course, with that hands-on, my skill haste is going into skill damage. And yeah, we're doing around the 10 million mark. And of course, we can make this a little bit extra silly because the range has a skill haste. And if we turn that on, if you've never hit the damage cap before, it has never been easier. And also the rare one where DTA interferes a little bit and we go over the damage cap. If you're unaware, there is a damage cap. 1 billion is the damage cap. If you do more than 1 billion, it just caps at 1 billion. That's also nothing in the game has more health on armor than 1 billion. And DTA can actually interfere a little bit with it and kind of misreport a little bit of a higher number. But yeah, that's of course only here at the range. But yeah, there is of course ways of gaining some skill haste and such. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing some of the shenanigans that we'll pull out of it. But in general, just the increase of around at least 50% on a build that has a ton of skill haste. Now, for instance, Eclipses have less than, for instance, a build like this, which actually has, although actually I need to turn this off again if we want to look at that number for realsies, because otherwise it'll show 500 something. And here we can just come in here and look at our skill haste, which is 94% here. So yeah, when we're triggering that active, we're getting 94% more skill damage there, and that can make quite a big difference. And I've been quite enjoying running that active and just triggering it here and there on Eclipse, or just running an Eclipse with that up and just doing a little bit more damage. Like it isn't that much if you're just using it, reaching tier 5 and just having it up. It isn't as big of an increase as we see here, because here's, yeah, it is getting doubled by the active. But yeah, skill builds actually performing really well this season. And that brings us to the conclusion on this video with the global modifier. Hardcore is definitely a pretty good modifier still. And yeah, while it is a little bit weaker than last 2 seasons, especially last season's one was also very powerful just because of how high the uptime on it was. This one actually, while not as powerful, also has decently good uptime. And yeah, the main ways to play it is either you hit the active a lot and make use of that, or you actually just fill up basically once and just keep going on that. I've been actually playing it mostly that way, just kind of reaching tier 5s in multiple, well, in all of them, and then using especially the weapon pack on the red builds, as we kind of saw with loaded up, multitasker, and then the best kind of defense. Although, yeah, you could change up the best kind of defense to either extra padding or safety first. That's kind of either a little bit more PFE or a little bit more hazard protection. Or even if you're, for instance, running around with attack 50 on your back, you could kind of take it with specialized. And then, yeah, especially with skill builds, hands-on is a no-brainer. And yeah, having disruption protection and also a little bit more hazard protection on top of that, yeah, can make for a really good one there. I do feel that, for instance, yeah, multitasker makes really good sense for a lot of hybrids where we can make use of that skill tier if it's going into a shield, if it's going into a turret and drone. That makes a lot of sense there as well. But even, for instance, yeah, this tech upgrades can go into some turret drone hybrids, but not per se a real game changer, but having just some more skill duration doesn't hurt. And then, as always, we have basically extra padding and safety first, interference blocker as kind of, yeah, just extra defenses. And those can be just general picks. If you, for instance, yeah, leave out best kind of defense. If you're not going for the headshots anyway, grab a safety first, grab an interference blocker against disrupt maybe, and have an easier time that way. And yeah, just having just having the main ones up, I feel, is for me the general way to go. But using the actives situationally, especially if it's, you know, for instance, at the end of a legendary, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just unload. You're going to unload anyway, but you have to watch out that for the rest of that fight, if it's, for instance, Roosevelt, where you're maybe unloading onto the Marauders with that, afterwards, you're going back to your baseline values. And yeah, that's even, for instance, having a full red build, you do going even from that 10 back down to 6, does hurt a little. But I've been enjoying this global modifier a lot, especially as well. The hostile side of things is not as invasive as last season. It being regen last season really did hurt here and there, especially as some people found out with some Marauders and stuff. And it was good that they removed it from that. But the blue here is just reduction. So it just takes longer to kill, but it doesn't make anything impossible to kill. And yeah, that's a big difference. But you still have to respect, especially yellow enemies that have a skill out, because they'll take a lot of reduced damage, especially if they have blue on top of it. And you have to respect red enemies because they'll just tear through you, especially if you're kind of expecting to kind of outlive them with like a tech tank or such. Yeah, that can make quite a difference. Now, of course, to red builds, a little bit less, but even that chip damage is quite a bit more. And yeah, that brings us to the end of this in-depth look into our into the global modifier of this season. One that I've yeah, definitely enjoyed so far, and I'm gonna keep enjoying for the rest of this season. Definitely, again, not as strong as some of the last season's ones, but definitely still worth it, and has a lot of just, yeah, I kind of like this one especially because yeah, it has components for a lot of builds. It isn't just red builds benefit, but no, even Eclipses benefit quite a bit. Tech tanks benefit quite a bit. Headhunters actually benefit the least, although even the specialization weapon buffs there can make a difference. So yeah, overall, I do like it, and yeah, it is nice and varied and has a little bit of everything, plus nostalgia to Division 1 on top. And yeah, for future videos, after we've finally done this global modifier video a little bit, you know, we're 3 weeks into the season, so it's a little late, but not that late. But yeah, we have some build collection updates to do. And then also I want to do a video on media maths and kind of discuss a few math things. Some nerdy shit as we'll go into that. So I hope you join me for those. If you did enjoy this video, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below. It does help out. So that little bit of shilling here. And I hope to catch you in the future. As always, have a good night.